student of Canadian-American relations, past and present. He writes about these relations in his new book, Doing the Continental. Dyment teaches political science at the University of Ottawa and at Carleton University. He has served on the staff of the Governor-General of Canada and as a senior policy advisor in the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. It is my pleasure to welcome David Dyment to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Thanks, Fanny.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
Not only that, you're a media commentator on many radio stations, including the BBC and the CBC.
Yeah, I've seen you particularly popular on CTV, for what it's worth, but there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've seen you. Yeah. Now, the central question of this book seems to be how best to engage Americans in many different ways.
Right.
What led you to this?
Well, it is a bit of a personal story as an author, and growing up in southwestern Ontario, there were two issues that kind of preoccupied me. One was the omnipresence of the United States, and then Quebec was this distant abstraction, you know, kind of a concept. So in my 20s, I learned French and did my PhD at the Université de Montréal, and lived, you know, with fellow Canadians in that setting. But I hadn't met the second requirement of that curiosity, which was to think more about our relationship with the United States, and that's what Doing the Continental is about, that relationship.
Yes, and certainly Trudeau suggested it was the mouse living next to the elephant or something like that.
Yeah.
And you say very clearly in Doing the Continental that maybe it was like that, could have been like that, but it's not anymore. We don't have to be the mouse.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it goes in one ear that Canada is a mouse in bed with the elephant, and it goes out the other, and the elephant part is great. But we mustn't let it just kind of pass through without being challenged. And this is, I think, this probably the central point of the book to take away, is we're more of a muskox or a moose. And that gives us a different relationship with the elephant than if we were simply a mouse, completely vulnerable to the elephant.
And sometimes we are vulnerable, and sometimes we're not, but we think we are.
Yeah. And we think we are because we misunderstand how the American system of government works. I interviewed ambassadors for the book. I interviewed Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton said, think about the unique contribution that Canada can make to the world. You know, Canada, you have more power. You can do things, and you can do things without so much attitude. Like you can go to, not go to Iraq and say no, but as when they asked me to speak at the U.S. Embassy early this year, don't say no with all this truculent attitude, as if we're some kind of adolescent country.
Oh, and we can be in the trench to go to Iraq, but we don't have to carry the spear.
Yeah, the whole idea, we don't need to be a junior spear carrier. We can contribute more to a joint project that we have with the United States. We share so many values, but we can do it more successfully if we think of ourselves as Bill Clinton said, that unique contribution that doesn't have a colonial legacy, it doesn't have an imperial tradition, and we can actually dovetail better with our chief allies' objectives if our first impulse isn't, hey, how many F-18s can we send? You already have it more than you can manage, and you want 7 more. Well, that symbolically seemed to be important. Now we're really doing something. But if we think a little more deeply about what could we do in Darfur that the Americans couldn't do, and in helping the Americans, we're more influential with the Americans, and then the other countries in the world see us as more important, and we're more influential with them.
So it's really how we think about ourselves a lot.
Yes.
Or how we think about our relationship with the United States. And I know there's some practical things that have to come in here. For instance, what goes on in the Oval Office and what goes on in the PMO. Much different.
Very different. And it's a good point. I mean, especially with a prime minister with a majority, he's an elected king. He or she can really do pretty much anything they want. They're going to get some pushback, and so on. They have to decide how much they're going to put up with. But we forget when mentioning being a TV commentator, whenever the American president comes to Ottawa or our prime minister goes to Washington, and I'm invited to speak about that, the question is, well, you know, they'll sort it out in their meeting, you know, the two chief representatives of the countries, they'll sort it out. And the idea is that we forget, as you know well, the American president is so contained and restrained by Congress with 435 members of the House of Representatives being elected every 2 years and raising $100,000 a week towards that re-election. They are exquisitely sensitive to the needs of their constituents. And they have all kinds of power. And the president is trying to, in a way, curry favor with them. Maybe he's advancing 8 issues that are core to his success. He'd love to help Canada, potentially, but he doesn't have the political capital to do too many things.
So what you're really saying is Prime Minister Harper can get together with President Obama and they can have a nice chum chat about everything from trade and to water resources, to oil and gas, to Iraq, to Afghanistan. But unless the U.S. President has Congress on his side, not much is going to happen.
Well, I interviewed people for the book who were in the Oval Office with the Prime Minister, and they would recount stories to me, like the President turning to our Prime Minister and saying, I'd love to help you with that, but you're going to need to go and see the chairman of the subcommittee in the Senate or the House of Representatives. That's the influence point. I'd love to help you, but our system doesn't work that way.
Right. And it's important that we really understand that, I think.
Yeah.
At every level.
And it gives us more flexibility, because when we're told, we will be punished, the corporate force in terms of one unified opinion of the United States will be turned against us.
Right.
The system is so divided. You really have to be, Saddam Hussein to get that type of focus against you. It's just not the way their system works with allies.
And do you think that a U.S. senator or congressman or woman pays much attention to what we're doing unless there's a big kerfuffle?
Right.
If you know what I mean.
I know talking.
Like we go along, unless we cause a big stir, they're so busy doing other things internationally.
I mean, they're preoccupied with domestic issues and international hotspots. And when we look at their media and say, hey, we're not being covered in the American media and we feel badly about that, we are really reflecting an insecurity of our own. We're not saying, great, do what you're about, but it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't matter to us that we shouldn't have this impulse to refer to what the Americans are thinking about us. And it's not just in society generally. It's in doing interviews in Ottawa. It's many of our leadership have that referential, like to refer to, impulse towards the imperial center. Just as we did have it once with London, we now have it with Washington. And Washington isn't asking that of us, and it's not what we need to do when we think about and react to the Americans.
Well, what if Canada did something as outrageous as decriminalizing drugs or legalizing marijuana?
Yeah.
The reaction of the United States would be swift or not, or would they care?
I think you make a good point. And on some of those very specific issues, we obviously have to be sensible. But when we think more generally, and there is some value in thinking conceptually, what we were just speaking about is something to consider. And also we have to, we as you say on the marijuana issue, why would you create a huge crisis without getting a lot of return for that? That's almost just being childish. We do have a responsibility in the continent to work with our partner. Yes.
You say continentalism is a force of nature we have to tame.
Right.
And what do you mean by that?
Right. Well, the way the debate and the way we think about Canadian-American relations is structured is there are a nationalist impulse and a continentalist one. And underpinning both is this colonial mentality that has the left saying, hey, have nothing to do with them, they're just bad news. I'm oversimplifying. And the continentalists saying, what a wonderful partner, why wouldn't we just hug them and bring them into our world and bring ourselves into their world? And we tend to, the way our system works, we have these decision points where we can decide what to do, and one or the other of those tendencies are in power. So if you want to tame continentalism, you say, hey, I want to take the best of those approaches to engaging the Americans. And so tame the benefits of continentalism, of our relationship with the United States, as best we can, but also being wary that you don't want to overdo it. There are dangers there.
Where do the deep roots of manifest destiny fit into this?
Yes, well, that's a great question. And manifest destiny is this idea that the United States has a God-given destiny to have dominion over North America. And it's a real fear for a lot of Canadians. And I did an academic, with that kind of rigor, literature search of the academic literature, of the general literature, Pat Buchanan. And for the last 30 years, there are no Americans saying, hey, we want to take over Canada. But we still have that fear. I mean, the reciprocity election of 1911, where Laurier lost, was a kind of a free trade election. The American, leading figures in the Senate and so on were saying, hey, this is great. We'll finally have the stars and stripes flying at the North Pole. And it really hurt his campaign. But so that's part of the historical legacy. It was there, but in the last 30 years, Americans haven't been talking that way, and we still think that's what they're about. I heard a leading figure from the left in Canada talk about her book, and for 5 of her 45 minutes, she chose to talk about American invasion plans of Canada.
Who was that? Was that McQuaid? No.
Well, I made it a policy in this book tour not to say individuals.
Not to say who. Yeah. Well, and the United States might take Quebec, but maybe not the rest of us.
Well, if Quebec was to, that was one of the fun chapters of the book, given what we said at the outset, is Manifest Destiny and Quebec. So if Quebec was to leave, and that seemed like a possibility for a long time, how would the United States respond, and would Manifest Destiny inform their response?
Sure. In the book, you have 12 steps for doing the Continental. Yeah. So when we come back, we'll talk about that, and then a little bit about softwood lumber and trade and exporting water and natural gas and all that entails.
Okay.
David Dyment, our guest, his book is called Doing the Continental, A New Canadian-American Relationship.